Hello, everyone, and welcome to a God Shift podcast with Shayna Rattler. I am Shayna Rattler, and I am so glad that you are here. And I need a favor from you. So, before I give you these nuggets and before I interview my guest, I need a favor from you. So, whatever platform you are listening to the podcast on, I would love if you would take a screenshot. Take a screenshot of your laptop, take a screenshot of whatever device it is that you are listening to this episode on, and I would love for you to share it. And when you share it, I would love if you would also tag us at a God Shift. Can you do that for me? Perfect. I appreciate it. So I'm really excited to introduce my guest to you today. Her name is Tiffany Huff-Strothers, and I am going to read her official bio, and then she can unofficially talk about who she is. So let's just get to the bio. Tiffany Huff-Strothers, also known as the Bounce Back Guide, is a wife, mother, Christian life coach who is passionate about helping women rebuild their lives after setbacks. Y'all know I love talking about setbacks. As the host of the Bounce Back Blueprint podcast and award winning author, she is helping women bounce back and transform their lives daily. Tiffany is also CEO of When She Thrives, a community based organization dedicated to empowering single mothers to move their families from poverty to prosperity through advocacy, education, and personal and professional development. In 2017, she published two books: 30 Day Stay, A Story of Escaping Death, Healing from Heartbreak and Finding Hope in Homelessness, and Empower Moments for the Everyday Woman, a 31-day devotional to empower your womanhood. Additionally, through When She Thrives, she's worked with dozens of single mothers to publish Scenes from a Single Mom's Volume 1 and 2 and 3. Tiffany studied communication and professional writing at Carlow University and higher education management at the University of Pittsburgh Graduate School of Education. In her spare time, you can catch her in the stands cheering for her sons, curled up with a good book, or in the kitchen trying new recipes with her husband. Welcome to the podcast, Tiffany Huff-Struthers.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so excited to be here and thank you for, sharing your space with me.
You are so welcome. We are honored to have you. So, Tiffany, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in your own words. I read the official wordy bio, like we all have, but just talk to us. Look, just be real. Who are you and what do you do?
I am a Pittsburgher, so I'm from Pittsburgh, home of the black and gold, and I'm a boy mom. And I am someone who lives a life where I intend to ensure that God gets the glory by using my story. And so ultimately, I am committed to helping other people live their fullest lives by empowering them to share their stories and understand how doing so gets God the glory. They can make an impact and an income. So I'm definitely an encourager, but I am a challenger as well, and I love to laugh.
Yes, me too. I tell people all the time, I take what I do seriously, but that doesn't mean that I have to be serious when I do it. And trust me, I get a little silly. So,
Yeah.
Tiffany, so let's get into a God shift moment for a minute as it pertains to your life. So, my definition of a God shift is the moment that anytime a moment in your life that you have a disruption, and then that disruption collides with God's purpose, and then it ultimately moves you into a greater destiny. So, can you describe a time in your life that you were experiencing a major disruption, whether it was a setback, a disappointment, a delay, some unexpected circumstance that God had to use in your life?
Yes. Two come to mind, but I will share this one. And of course, at the moment, I didn't recognize it as a God shift. But I was in a very tumultuous relationship from a very early age. So first, my first relationship was a very long-term relationship. We ended up having two children, but it was a very tumultuous relationship, and it was abusive in all forms. And I finally got to the point where I was like, I'm done. Enough is enough. And we separated. I moved out with our children, and I set some very firm boundaries. And oftentimes when we set boundaries, people feel threatened by them, and he was
Yeah.
definitely threatened by them. And he ultimately broke into our home, and my God shift happened as I faced the barrel of a gun. Because for many years I had given him all of the power. I had surrendered everything, all control to him. And as I faced the barrel of that gun, I decided in that moment that this was the moment that I had to take my power back.
Mhm.
And so ultimately I ended up being shot. Thank God I did not lose my life. But,
Hallelujah.
when people tell you that their lives flash before their eyes, it's not a joke. I literally could see pictures of me breastfeeding my son, images of me as a little girl kissing my dad on the cheek, pictures of me at my high school graduation. And so
Yeah.
I knew if I didn't do something, I was going to lose my life. So God spared my life. Thankful for that. And it set off a number of shifts, if you will, in my
Yeah.
life that were now, as I look back in hindsight, clearly preordained by God for
Yeah.
me to get to a space where it was just he and I.
Yeah. Before we get to that, let's unpack this boundaries thing a little bit because I think it's so important. I think most of us we recognize that it's important for us to have boundaries in place if we're going to have healthy relationships, whether or not they are personal or professional. But for the listener that is out there, that's like, that's something that I have struggled with as well, putting in boundaries in place. What is one tip that you would give them of how they can do that?
You know, this is probably going to sound very cliche, but for me, boundaries came down to me really trusting God.
Hmm.
And so if you're challenged with setting boundaries, I would go back and really seek God about it. Because ultimately, when we are afraid to set boundaries, it's usually because we fear the response of others. But if
Sure.
you are really aligned with what God would have you do and who He would have you be, then what others think or how they receive your obedience is really none of your business.
Absolutely, I totally agree. I
When
totally agree. So I'm a person that I want to set boundaries. Do I demonstrate to others what my boundaries are? Do I tell them, hey, listen, I'm living my life different now, and so this is what I expect of you? Like, give us a practical tip.
I think a practical tip is to, first of all, pause before you respond, right? Because so often we're on autopilot that we don't even give ourselves the space or permission to consider a question or a decision. So I would say first pause and then think about, does this align with where I'm going or what it is that I intend to do? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. But because it's what you've always done, you're on autopilot and you continue to do it. So I would say pause and reflect before you respond. Even pausing is setting a boundary, right? Giving yourself the space to consider the decision or whether or not you want to say yes or no. And remember that when you say yes to someone else, you're saying no to yourself in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I believe is that, we've heard all the time, like you teach people how to treat you. And I believe that if you have been in the habit of tolerating things from people that you no longer want to tolerate, it's okay to say that. For example, if there is someone in your life that you have been tolerating them gossiping, like there, and you've done it for years, like you've let them be the one to call you, like, girl, did you hear that so and so? It's okay for you to, once you decide that you no longer want that in your life, as soon as they call, like, oh, you know what, let me stop you real quick because I really don't want to hear about that. And trust
Yeah.
me, after you do that a couple of times, they're going to quit bringing that to you.
Yeah.
So I believe that you should tell people what it is that you expect of them, because people are not mind readers. And if you are wanting someone to do something differently than what they have done, I believe that you should just flat out tell them. And then, like you said, then I have to reflect and say, are they actually respecting this? And if they're not, then you really have to reevaluate, what role that person needs to play in your life, and in, if any. But anyway, this is not a conversation totally about boundaries. So let's get back to your story. So you're in a difficult, toxic relationship. that you are now deciding, I don't want this anymore. I don't want to tolerate this anymore. And he doesn't take lightly to that. So he shows up with a gun. Who knows what his intentions are? His intentions could have been to kill you. His intentions could have been, just to say, I want you to know that I'm still running things. But
Yeah.
why did God have to use those circumstances to get your attention? And what do you think he was trying to get you to see? Because that's pretty drastic, right?
It's very drastic, but some of us have very hard heads. Let's just be real.
Me too.
I know now that I was taking God's grace for granted. And I think so often we do that, not necessarily intentionally, but it's just who we are as human beings, right? So I believe that he needed to show me one, that he was in control,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
not the person with the gun or me. And two, I also think he needed me to finally realize that he had more for me. And in order for me to receive it, I needed to be who he created me to be. And that relationship wasn't aligned with that. So I think really God needed to get my attention. And I was so hard headed and I was so set upon doing things the way I thought they needed to be done, so set upon pleasing other people and not him, that even the small signs weren't working. I don't know if you've ever seen that meme when the woman is like, God send me a sign, and he literally hits her over the head with the stop sign and she's
She's like laid out. Yeah, I haven't seen that.
that would be me.
So how did you respond? You're like, okay, Lord, I get it. I'm taking you for granted. I'm hard headed. How did you respond?
Well, in that moment, I responded by saying that I'm not going to surrender to this anymore. But of course, like I said, because of the fact that I had a major injury and everything in my life changed after that moment, I was left with nothing. I literally had nothing but God. And so it was to the point where, like, I had to surrender, or who knows what my life would have become. So at that juncture, he got my full attention. It was like, what do I do next? And then what do I do next? And then what do I do next? Whereas before, it was like, okay, God, this is what I'm going to do. Bless this, please.
Right, right. So we're going to pause for a quick break and then we're going to come back and talk about what do you do when you are faced with a God shift. This episode is brought to you by the free guide, When God Says Shift. Inside that guide, you'll discover the 4 shifts required to follow God's plan to move you out of disruption and into a greater destiny, expectancy, and possibility. Head to GodSaysShift.com to access it now. So you have this God shift. You're shot, but thank God you're alive. You recognize that you had been taking God's grace for granted. It's new. His mercies are new every morning. His grace is, ever abounding. You realize that you're taking that for granted. I say that when we are trying to embrace disruption and we are trying to ultimately get to our destiny, that a God shift is required to be able to access that new level of destiny that awaits us. And I believe that one of the ways that we do that is by really putting God first and elevating his position in our life. In your opinion, why is that important? And why was that important during your situation?
Well, it's important because if I explain it to people this way, we can function, quote unquote, without God first, right? And we might even do well, because I wasn't, internally I was living a horrible life, but I was a public success by all the standards of
Yeah,
life. I had checked all of the boxes. But it's the same as if you have a cell phone and you don't have it connected to any service provider, it will work on Wi-Fi, right? A smartphone will work on Wi-Fi. It has a certain level of functionality. However, if you want that cell phone to perform at its maximum capacity, if you want to be able to call and text and surf the internet all of the time, that phone has to be connected to a source,
right.
right? Which is a T-Mobile or a Sprint or a Verizon. And the same is true for us. If we aren't connected to our source first, we might be able to function. We might work a little bit. It might look good sometimes, but ultimately, if you want to live your fullest life, you have to be able to put God first, because he's the one who designed your life. So if
Yeah.
I don't know the life that I'm supposed to live, how am I going to live it fully?
Yeah, it's almost like manufacturer instructions. When you buy something new, how can you expect so you really know how to use it if you don't read the instructions? And you may be able to figure out how to use it at the basic level, but there
Mhm.
just might be some functionality or some features that you would not really even realize that you had access to if you weren't reading the manufacturer instructions. So that's so good. So, Tiffany, if someone is listening to this podcast and they're like, I am so glad to hear that there is hope on the other side of my disruption. I'm so glad to know that it can be as simple as elevating God's position in my life to be able to access what it is that He has for me or where it is that He needs me next, but they're struggling to be able to do so. What
Mm.
advice would you give them?
So, Shayna, like I said, when this happened to me, I lost everything. I ended up homeless, um, clearly heartbroken. I had two children under two. My mobility was interrupted because my femur was shattered and I couldn't walk. So that meant I couldn't work. I was also financially destitute. I ended up filing bankruptcy. So I was pretty much at the lowest of the low in all areas of my life. And what I now know is when we have a setback, right, our minds automatically go to how do I get back up and get moving back to where I was going, right? But when everything is a mess, it's hard to say this is where I need to start because
Sure.
then you feel like there's an imbalance. But if you're willing to wake up every day and control what you can control, you'll begin to build that solid foundation. And that's what I had to do. I had to start prioritizing my time in the morning and setting a new standard, right? And developing a new routine where I put God and myself first. And that way I was able to begin to determine and discern what would be the best next step.
That's so
So
good.
it's a complete shift, right? Because people will be like, "Oh, you bankrupt, you need to do this with your credit, right? You need to get a job so you can pay this. Or you overweight, you better start going to the gym. You need a meal plan." But before you can do any and all of that, you got to get reconnected to your source. You got to have a solid foundation, and I call it being famous at home first.
I like that.
Yes. So and again, it's all very simplistic, but it's not necessarily easy.
Right. I got to write that down. Famous at home first.
Yes. And so famous at home first has three levels. The first level is being famous at home with God, right? Prioritizing your relationship with God. The second level is being famous at home for your with yourself. So that means in your body, in your mind, not only what you put in your body, but also where you take your body, right? The things you are doing with your body, because let's face it, this is your home while you're here, and it's
Mhm.
on loan to you. You can't necessarily get a new body, contrary to what the world will have you believe.
Right.
So you got to take care of your body because you can't take any care of anything else. And then the third level is literally famous on the home front.
Yeah.
So that means where God has given you dominion, your husband, your children, even if you're single, the space that you feel where you live, really taking care of that. So that's famous at home first, so that when you leave out the door, you are prepared to be your best self first.
That's good. I love that. If I was to give someone some advice that was struggling to put God first, I would say get in a routine because anything that you do repeatedly becomes easier over time. And it doesn't have to be this elaborate, drawn out something that you have to go study online. You can simply start every morning by making sure that you're spending at least 5 minutes being quiet before you pick up the phone, before you say anything to anyone, just asking God to show you who it is that you need to become, show you what it is that He wants you to do, show you what it is that He wants you to learn. And as long as you are quiet enough, He will give you the instructions.
Yeah.
The Bible says that the steps of a good man are ordered, which means that the instructions were already in place before you were experiencing what you were experiencing, but you got to be willing to move your feet. So that's the advice that I would give. Start a routine. Get up every morning, play some worship music, spend some time in prayer, but more importantly, spend some time listening, because I guarantee you that if He asks, he will answer. So, Tiffany, before we begin to wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
Sure. I will, in fact, share the morning routine that I have and that I teach my clients to
I
utilize.
like that.
And also, I will share two boundaries that I have people set when they first start out. So the first boundary, which you touched on, is don't plug your phone next to your bed. Um, Plug your phone somewhere where you can get to it if you need to, but where it's not going to be a distraction, not only when you wake up, but before you go to sleep, right? The second boundary that I encourage people to set is a boundary that will allow you to sleep your way to the top. That means at a certain point in the evening, you shut down. You're not texting, you're not scrolling, you're not talking to people on the phone. You are giving yourself the space to wind down and go to sleep and sleep your way to the top. Contrary to popular belief, we need rest. You can't sleep when you die.
Right.
And so the morning ritual that I teach my clients is called the Power Morning Ritual. And very similar to what you said, you don't have to do it at all of it, all of the time, but it is a great guide for you. And I tell people, if you can get the POW, you'll be better off. And the ER is like the icing on the cake. So the P is for prayer. Very straightforward, praying. The O is for opening up or meditation. So that is your time to get quiet and listen for God after you've prayed. The W is for writing, which is journaling. And this is not like preparing to write your bestseller. This is literally emptying out those things that are clouding your mind, or even the words that you got while you were meditating. The E is for exercise, and the R is for reading. And generally, I would encourage you to read the word, but anything that will feed your mind or your spirit. So that's the Power Morning Ritual.
I love that. If you can do that, that will definitely put you on a good start to your day. So how can our listeners find you?
I am on every social media platform at the Tiffany Huff. My podcast, The Bounce Back Blueprint, is just about anywhere you can listen to a God shift. You can also listen to the Bounce Back Blueprint. And my website is the TiffanyHuffExperience.com.
Perfect. And is there anything that you would like to offer our listeners to take things further with you?
I would love to take things further with your listeners. I do one-on-one coaching to help women with building that bounce back blueprint. And that information is at bit.ly/your bounce back guide.
Perfect. And so you don't have to worry about writing that down. In the show notes, I will have links to her social media. I will have links to her website, and I will also have links to the resource that she just shared with you. Well, Tiffany, I thank you so much for being here today on a God Shift podcast. I thank you for being willing to share your story. Most importantly, I am so grateful that God saw fit to spare your life, because clearly you have work to do and you are doing it. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you.
Thank you so very much for having me. I don't take you sharing your space with me lightly, and it was quite the pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening to a God Shift podcast. And I hope you will tune into the next episode and share this as well. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye bye.